here, but will we have a statement from the White House expressing condolences? Will there be something that does also include strong language about North Korea in the past and North Korea going forward? My sense is that there will be a balance of condolences, but also talking about the need for reforms in North Korea. But we can't understate how important it will be for that language that the White House will be putting out in the coming days, John.
Dan, thank you. Dan Lothian there, live for us in Washington. Along with the White House, the Pentagon, the State Department is closely following events in Pyongyang, North Korea. Elise Levitt is the senior producer at the State Department. She joins us once again on the line. Elise, I understand you have some new details.
Well, John, in addition to the White House obviously reaching out to the South Korean Blue House and coordinating that very closely, obviously the intelligence community watching this very closely. A U.S. official tells our senior national security producer, Pam Benson, who follows intelligence matters for us, look, this brings extraordinary change and uncertainty to Korea, and we're mindful of that. And South Korea's concern is warranted because an insecure North Korea could well be an even more dangerous South Korea. And that's why, as Dan said, U.S. and South Korea, as I've been told tonight, very closely coordinating this situation together. And even as President Obama was talking that tough line with President Lee, U.S., as we've been reporting all night, has been looking for ways to keep the options open, trying to engage with North Korea just because of this unpredictability and insecurity about the North Korean secession. They really didn't know what Kim Jong-il's health was. 1 minute he was very sick, and recently one of our Pentagon producers, Larry Shaughnessy, was traveling in the region and was told by U.S. military officials actually would believe that the pace of the secession has slowed. So U.S. really wanted to keep its options open, keep those lines of communication to North Korea open, and several talks over the last 6 months, 2 rounds of North Korea talks on the nuclear issue, then these recent talks as recently as last week on food aid. U.S. not closing any doors to North Korea, and certainly right now, while they're coordinating with South Korea, it's certainly looking for them not to overreact right now, John.
Okay, Elise Levitt on the line there, our senior State Department producer. One country which probably has better idea than most exactly what's going on right now inside Pyongyang would be China in Beijing. Stan Grant is live for us, but we are pretty certain that the Chinese will not be giving away too many details, even though they probably have some kind of idea about the succession, about what is about to happen next, and in fact they were probably told before anybody else was that the dear leader was dead.
Indeed, John, as you know full well, China does not like surprises. They like to control things within their borders, and they like to control things within their sphere of influence, and North Korea certainly is that. It's a line that's oft used, but North Korea and China have been described as like lips in teeth. We're hearing a lot about uncertainty, about the unexpected, about what may or could happen in North Korea. A lot of that obviously will come from the outside, from the West, because North Korea is not called the Hermit Kingdom for nothing. It's a very opaque place. But for North Korea, for China, this is not going to come as any surprise. Kim Jong-il has been in poor health for some time. He's traveled to China. He's brought his son here. China has had constant envoys going back and forth between Beijing and Pyongyang. So certainly as far as succession goes, certainly as far as controlling this situation, trying to stabilize this situation as soon as possible, there would be contingencies in place. Mike Tenoy has talked about the level of stability in North Korea that he's seen of late. We also have to remember that Kim Jong-il, however eccentric his leadership may have been depicted as, was able to survive for a very long time, was able to see off successive US presidents, was able to use brinksmanship to be able to advance his cause, to give a little bit here and take a little bit more back there. What we do need to focus on, though, John, is the unexpected, the uncertain. We need to focus on the possibility of misunderstanding. Now, I was last year at Yongpyong Island when North Korea shelled that island, and largely what that came about was because of the misunderstanding. South Korea were carrying out war games in the region. North Korea had warned against it. South Korea continued, and then North Korea hit. Afterwards, there were great recriminations within South Korea about the inability of their forces to strike back fast enough and hard enough. Lee Myung-bak was criticised for his leadership. So certainly when you have heightened tensions, when you have a history of conflict, it opens the door for that misunderstanding, and that's where problems can arise. John?
Yes, Dave, something which we haven't talked a lot about since this news broke that Kim Jong-il is dead is actually Kim Jong-il, the man. And to many people who looked at him from the outside, he was considered the idiot son. He was the buffoon with the big hair. He was the ruthless dictator. So as far as history will judge him, how will he be remembered?
Well, it's different history, isn't it? Certainly within his own country, he was almost the son of God. If you look at his father, Kim Il-sung, a man who was lionized for his role in fighting the Japanese, was seen as a freedom fighter, someone who did appear to be godlike in the minds of North Koreans, and still held in that way today, the eternal president. His son, Kim Jong-il, there was a myth surrounded about him, that he was born in a shack on a sacred mountain, guided by a star. As you can see, all the hallmarks of some sort of biblical birth. In fact, as we now know, is more likely he was born in the Soviet Union while his father was there. Again, he lived the life of a princeling. He was raised as a demigod himself. And yes, the eccentricities were undeniable. You touch on the bouffant hair, the platform shoes, the penchant for ballroom dancing. He saw himself as a filmmaker, was married to a South Korean actress that he was said to have kidnapped, used to bring his personal chefs in to cook his own particular delicacies that he liked from Russia and so on, had a fear of flying, only liked to travel by train. So a man who was certainly seen as very eccentric, but we can't just see him through that prism. We have to see him also as a man who was able to survive. And I think, as Mike Chenoy has pointed out in the past, the primary aim, the primary business of the regime there is survival. Juche, which is the national philosophy, is all about self-reliance. And it's about building yourself to protect yourself against any outside influence. He was able to do that. He was able to survive. He was able to use the six-party negotiations to advance his cause. In the past, he was seen to offer one thing on the other hand, to take two more things off the table with the other. If, in terms of survival, he will certainly be seen as being very effective. But if you look at the inside of his country, what we hear out of there, the stories of mass starvation, the fact that they rely on food aid, on 80 to 90% of their fuel supplies from China, the fact that they couldn't survive without that aid, the horrendous stories of people who have risked everything to escape that country, risked death, leaving their families behind to try to get out and lead a better life. How he'll be remembered for the treatment of his own people may not be so positive, John.
The other thing too, which we have to keep in mind, is that in the past, North Korea under his leadership has been described as the soprano state, which is a reference to the illicit activity which has gone on inside North Korea, everything from the manufacturing of methamphetamine to counterfeiting US currency. There's also been the illicit nuclear missile program, selling missiles around the world. I mean, this is, in many senses of the word, if you are to believe US intelligence and Western intelligence and diplomats, this has been a rogue regime.
Absolutely a rogue regime, a hermit kingdom that was cut off from the rest of the world, so opaque we just didn't know what was going on in there. Of course, you look at the illicit trade, whether it's guns, whether it's tobacco, whether it's drugs, and whether it's nuclear arms. And of course, we know of the relationship between Pakistan, for instance, and North Korea. Anyone who's looked closely at the development of the Pakistani nuclear program knows that senior scientists from there traveled to North Korea, that North Korea and Pakistan colluded. Some have pointed to the role of China in that as well as a proliferator. But certainly North Korea and Pakistan worked very, very closely on their joint nuclear programs. And really, that's what it was all about. The ultimate card that North Korea could play The card it could play to get a real seat at the table was its nuclear arms, was to carry out a nuclear test and say to the rest of the world, look, we have arrived, we're not this silly little country, we're not this hermit kingdom ruled by this eccentric bouffant hairdo platform chew leader, we are someone now who can inflict real damage. And that's when you started to see the whole relationship shift. Remember before when George Bush had described him as a dictator who was starving his people as this evil man? So much of that changed after he got nuclear weapons. Then there were letters directed to him asking for negotiation, saying come back to the table, see what we can work out. Holding those nuclear arms, being able to proliferate nuclear arms throughout the world has really been a trump card for them, and one they've been prepared to play. John?
One which is also the trade, if you are to believe what the United States says, the trade in illicit weapons has also been a much-needed source of hard currency for that regime, which has been heavily sanctioned for many, many years. For those of you who are just joining us, we'd like to recap our main story. It is the end of an era in North Korea. State television says North Korean leader Kim Jong-il has died. State TV said the 69-year-old leader suffered a heart attack on Saturday whilst on a train trip. It also said a funeral will be held December 28th in Pyongyang. Kim Jong-il had been in power since 1994 when his father died of a heart attack. As we said, the news of the dear leader's death was announced on North Korean state TV, and the anchor gave a very emotional delivery. Let's listen.
조선인민군 최고 사령관이신 위대한 영도자 김정일 동지께서 주체 2011년 12월 17일 8시 30분에 현지 지도의 길에서 급병으로 서거하셨다는 것을 가장 비통한 심정으로
An indication there of the cult of personality which Kim Jong-il built up around himself inside that country. It was one way which he maintained absolute control. It is impossible now, though, to say what North Korea will be like without Kim Jong-il. But as we gather international reaction and perspective, let's take a look at what might be written about the self-proclaimed dear leader in the history books. Here's Dan Rivers.
Kim Jong-il always cut a slightly bizarre figure. His diminutive stature and characteristic hair were parodied by some in the West. But for the citizens of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, Kim was the embodiment of this reclusive state. Feared, loved, worshipped, obeyed, his cult of personality was deeply entrenched. His father was Kim Il-sung, who founded North Korea with Soviet backing after World War II. Kim Jong-il was just a little boy when the Korean War broke out in 1950, with the Soviet-backed North invading the American-backed South. After fighting ended, Kim Jong-il became steeped in his father's philosophy of juche, or self-reliance, and the North became ever more reclusive. The North and South never formally signed a peace treaty and remained technically at war, separated by a tense demilitarized zone. Gradually, Kim Jong-il was groomed for the top, making public appearances in front of cheering crowds. When Kim Il-sung died in 1994, he was declared eternal president. So his son instead became General Secretary of the ruling Workers' Party of Korea, and by 1998, as head of the army, he consolidated his position of absolute power.
He will be remembered as a person who was responsible for awful things, for the existence of one of the worst dictatorships in probably not only Korean history but in the world history, at least in the 20th, 21st century. Yes, he did not create this dictatorship, it was his father's, but he took responsibility and he made sure that it continued for many more years.
He was known for his love of fine wines, at odds in a country where food shortages and privation were common. While the dear leader, as he became known, is said to have indulged in his appetite for the finer things, his people were literally starving to death. The collapse of the Soviet Union hit North Korea hard, suddenly ending guaranteed trade deals. And then devastating floods compounded the famine. Estimates vary for the number that died, but even the regime itself admitted that almost 250,000 perished between 1995 and 1998. Some say it was more like 10 times that figure. But in the capital, Pyongyang, the artifice of a successful state was maintained. An opulent subway, proof, the dear leader would say, of the DPRK's progress under his and his father's leadership. Kim Jong-il was well known as a film buff, here visiting the set of a North Korean production. His personal video library was set to include 20,000 titles, with Rambo and Friday the 13th supposedly topping the dear leader's favourite flicks. In 2000, there appeared to be a